All right, here today with Ariel from Hivemapper, talking about the Hivemapper launch. This is super cool. First talked to Ariel about a year ago when it was still a newer project, and now we are ready to get this thing live. Ariel, super psyched to be here and talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
The Hivemapper is a dash cam. People are driving around with it. It's collecting imagery. Hivemapper, the company, is selling that imagery to whatever customers are out there. Like, that's how the whole thing works, and the drivers get rewarded with tokens.
Yep.
So pretty straightforward. Blockchain and meatspace project, super cool stuff. What makes for a great Hivemapper? So someone who buys a unit, like, who are you looking to buy this thing?
I think there's a couple of types of folks. One is obviously the Uber drivers, the Lyft drivers, FedEx drivers, right? People who are seeing many different parts of a city on a continuous basis, right? Like a bus would be bad. Bus just does the same route every single day, does it multiple times per day. That's not great.
Right.
At the extreme, it's definitely the FedEx drivers and the Uber drivers and the Lyft drivers. Then there's another class of folks, which is like people just drive a lot, right? Like, you know, I probably log 40, 50 miles a day roughly. So I think that's like definitely that next class. And then, you know, probably the third tier is like people who are only doing like 5, 10, 15 miles a day.
Right.
So you have to kind of think about it in terms of like, all right, like which group do I fall in? And when we were in the early days, when we met you, we were launched at that point in Los Angeles, not with a Hivemapper Dash Cam. It was a third-party dash cam that we were using.
Yep.
And it's the moment that the Uber drivers and the Lyft drivers and some of the FedEx drivers came into the network, then boom, like LA, from a coverage perspective, just like expanded very rapidly.
Okay. And is there a tier between, say, Uber, Lyft, who are going really random all over the place, versus a FedEx driver who's got a route, like they're going generally the same place every day?
Yeah.
Is there, you're thinking of kind of Uber, Lyft is probably the top tier?
Well, it's interesting. So from a fleet, we think of all of those as kind of different types of fleets, right? And a typical Uber driver or Lyft driver doesn't really go into, you know, these kind of more commercially oriented places, right? So think of warehouses that are next to airports, right? Yep. So a FedEx driver is probably going to see those kinds of places because they're doing like a lot of commercial deliveries to like hospitals and airports and those kind of places. And so you definitely want that mixture. Like, you know, if you're building a fleet, you don't just want Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, right? You also want like some garbage trucks, some FedEx, you know, so to see all these other kinds of parts of the city.
Interesting. Okay, so there's two kind of like customer bases. There's the singleton who's the Uber and Lyft driver, and I've been telling all of my Uber drivers, I'm like, dude, check out this Hivemapper thing. It's going to change your life. And then there are the fleet runners who are saying, hey, I'm going to buy a bunch of these things and then pass them out to either an Uber fleet or maybe they have their own delivery fleet, like a delivery service in a town, something like that. Are you thinking about how you're serving those two sets of customers in different ways?
Yeah, they are different. Yeah, so there's people who are like, look, I'm going to buy 50 of these, 100 of these, and go recruit, you know, Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and those kinds of folks. And then I'm going to do effectively token splitting, right? I bought a dash cam, you know, so I invest in the dash cam. You know, for a lot of Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, a dash cam is actually quite a useful tool, putting beyond the mapping stuff, right? So they show up and they give them a free dash cam, and they do some sort of token splitting with them, you know, and that's up to them. So we are announcing that we'll provide tools to enable a fleet, and one of those tools is this concept of token splitting, right? And just make that really easy for between the fleet operator and the drivers.
You guys are learning from other projects. Very cool to see that. I think it's really cool to see all these projects go at the same time and y'all learn from each other. Dive in a little bit to the other applications for a dash cam for an Uber or a Lyft driver. Do they get additional insurance benefits from that, or do you guys see that kind of happening as far as them having that in their car?
Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, they have those for two reasons. One is if somebody hits them and they're not at fault, then they need evidence or they want evidence of that, so they don't lose their license, or they don't want their insurance rates to go up, right? If you're an Uber driver and you're like, look, I'm making X amount of dollars, and then all of a sudden, boom, my insurance rates go up because I was in an accident, but it was no fault of mine, that sucks, right? That's eating into your monthly pay for the next 2-3 years. The purpose of the Hivemapper Dash Cam can solve that, right? Especially the Hivemapper Dash Cam S has some additional features that are actually quite good at that kind of stuff.
Okay, so let's talk about the Hivemapper Dash Cam, the HDC, versus the Hivemapper Dash Cam S for security. What are the differences? Why would you buy one or the other?
On November 3rd, so there'd be about a couple hundred of the Hivemapper Dash Cam, and so those the first one that's being manufactured and shipped. The Hivemapper Dash Cam S has some additional features. In addition to the imagery that's being collected for the map, it's also recording video at 4K at 30 frames per second. And it's storing that to an actual drive that ships with the dash cam itself. So that is really a fantastic device if you're an Uber driver, Lyft driver, and you're thinking about the problems that we just talked about in terms of security and insurance and compliance and all that kind of stuff.
Very cool. Okay, so maybe a normal person might not want that, but if you're driving a ton, you might as well spend a little bit extra. It's not that much extra, and get it.
Exactly.
And then have the full bang. Is there any difference between someone putting a dash cam in their windshield or on their side as far as how much they're going to earn?
No, there's not actually. And so we make, I think the community has to have a conversation about that, because I think that the vast majority of people do put them front facing, but there's a lot of value in the side facing. The side facing is really focused on what we refer to as stores and doors, right? So if you're building a map, you really want to understand, okay, what buildings are there, what's the name of that business there, all that kind of information. Yeah. And that side-facing camera that's facing the sidewalk is going to be really ideal for that. And so we'll see how the network ultimately grows, but I definitely would not want a situation where like 95% of dash cams are forward-facing and only 5% are side-facing. Okay. And so I think we'd have to figure out is like, okay, if that's the case, then how do we rebalance that and maybe provide additional incentives for folks who are doing side-facing cameras.
Okay, so walk me through the incentives. We'll start with the driver. The driver just gets tokens for driving.
Exactly. So the idea is that what we're really trying to incentivize, right, from the customer perspective, we're trying to generate high coverage within a region, right? So let's take the LA Metro as an example, very, very large region, roughly 100,000 road kilometers. So a lot of roads for sure. And so how do we get 100,000 road kilometers, right? How do we get high quality data there? How do we then maintain the freshness there? Right, so if you're a driver in, let's say, LA, we don't necessarily want you thinking about that day to day, but that's effectively what's happening from a reward perspective, right? If you're driving into many, many different parts of the city on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, you're helping drive coverage in that specific region. You'll see those honey token rewards on a weekly basis, and then we'll give you some analytics and some coverage to help you understand what parts of the city you actually covered. Right, so if you're interested and you're kind of geeking out on this kind of stuff, as some people do, then like you'll be able to see that. Other people are just like, look, I'm just driving, I'm doing my thing, I'm worried about that, and like this thing is just happening in the background, and that's cool as well. So that's the primary incentive mechanism, what we call map coverage. And then there's map consumption, and map consumption is basically this idea of like as customers are actually buying and using that imagery. So let's say you mapped, Broadway and 18th, okay, in New York City. And then a customer comes and actually buys that imagery, you, along with other people who mapped Broadway and 18th, will actually get additional tokens on top of that, right? So we're really trying to incentivize not just coverage, but also saying, look, we want you to go where customers care about, right? And so that's the map consumption token reward. And so for that, you don't have to do anything. I mean, you could have just mapped it yesterday or 2 days ago, hadn't seen it in a couple days. And then boom, somebody buys that imagery for that location, and you're earning additional.
I think when we talked last time, you were thinking about driving, I thought of it as like higher and higher pressure for a place that hasn't been mapped that maybe a customer's asked you to map. Yeah. There'll be bonuses for that as well?
Yeah, not at launch. We will definitely add that. We get that a lot from customers. It's like, look, I really need these, 50 locations in LA or SF or wherever. Yep. And so, how do we draw, like basically bounties, effectively. And so I think the network, the reason we didn't do that at launch was say, like, let's let the network develop naturally and organically. And then if people want specific locations, that's kind of an additional thing later on.
Dig it. All of that makes sense. And that begs a question with all of these blockchain meatspace projects is, do you have customers who are buying this data? Or is that still like, hey, we'll get those customers?
No, we have customers.
Okay. Can you talk about who they are?
It's like a novel concept, I know, in the blockchain. Yeah, we like revenue and we like customers. Look, I think it's, in addition to the revenue, I think that you got to be sure that you're building something that customers want, right? And the way to know that in terms of, are we generating high quality map data and imagery? Are we generating the good coverage that the customers care about, right? All those things, we can only validate that if there's real customers who are buying this and utilizing this data. And so look, I've been in the mapping industry for a while, so I know who a lot of the customers are. They know me, they've seen some of the other projects that I've done in the past. So it's not like, boom, I'm a new thing and a new player in this market. And so that definitely helps, right? And I know where to go as well, right? Which is a big part of it. And so we will definitely, look, in the next 9 to 12 months, I want to be really clear about this. The supply is the product, right? So you can't, you can only pre-sell so much. At some point you need that supply, which is all the contributors out there doing amazing work, driving around, building the product through driving, then that actually turns into potentially much bigger deals and many more customers down the road. But yes,
Got it. So it's a little bit chicken and egg, but yeah, you guys do have them right now.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Good. And you can't say there, those are all NDA stuff. Is that kind of standard in the mapping
We will
business?
we will announce it. So I think there will be like a whole process in terms of announcing that.
As they
So
come
we'll
out,
let that play out.
All right.
But it's a big name. It's a good name.
Super exciting stuff. Walk me through then when people are going to get their Hivemappers, because that's always a question. That's certainly one of the problems with the first one, Helium, is that people ordered them, they got them a year later.
Yeah.
We're now in November. We should have people getting them already. A couple hundred should have already gotten the first batch.
Yeah, so that first batch, a couple hundred, shipped out. So we have about 5,500 pre-orders.
Pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we're making our way through that backlog. So we want to be in a position where we can communicate to somebody who ordered it, let's say back in, May or April or June or July, this is when you're going to get your dash cam. We think that the majority of customers we should be able to ship out before the end of this year. Right, so that's what we're targeting.
Most of those 5,500 should be out by Christmas.
Yes. We are, working really hard to try to make that happen. Hopefully, we get all of them before Christmas, but I cannot give you 100% certainty that will all happen. It's the real world, right? Like it's kind of funny. We were talking about this before. Is like we thought it'd be like the software, some hardware issue that was stopping. Yes, those are issues that we had to work through, but it was like the foam inserts that go into the box, right? Like we just didn't have enough of them at the quality that we expected. And so we had to throw away a bunch. Fine, not a big deal. But that the more important thing is like that slowed the shipping process because we want, when somebody unboxes this, A, we want to make sure that camera doesn't move around during shipping too much. And B, I think it should be a really nice experience when you pull it out of there.
It should be pretty easy.
Yeah.
It should be plug and play. That's probably the last question I got is when we look at people putting these in, like how difficult is it to do it? Is it like a super complex process? Does it work with iPhone and Android? You just stick it to your windshield, turn it on and go? Like walk me through that.
So it works with iPhone and Android.
Okay.
So basically your iPhone or Android device, there's an app that you install, Hivemapper app, and then it just pairs to that dash cam. Try to make it as easy as we can. We'll make it even easier and easier. The actual mounting process and the onboarding process is about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So it ships with a mount that you can basically sticky to your windshield. That whole process may be 10 minutes, and then the onboarding process is 5 minutes, and then the pairing is, 30, 40 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
So it's pretty easy.
Pretty straightforward. Ripping. Well, I got a million more questions, but I want to see them answered in the unfolding of the project. I'm super excited to see where it goes, and thanks a ton for taking the time and explaining Hivemapper to the greater public. So
Thanks, Nick. It was fun.
rock on.
All right, man. Good.